Welcome to First Presbyterian Church, where faith is nurtured, curiosity encouraged, diversity welcomed, and all are loved. I'm Pastor Sue Collar. Thank you so much for worshiping with us today. If this is one of your first times with us, please text hello to the number on the screen. We'd love to connect with you. And if you are watching on Facebook, say hi in the comments. We'd love to see who's worshiping together. One of the important things for our church is our spiritual growth. We don't want to be stuck where we are. We want to continue to grow in our understanding of who Jesus is, who God is, of how we live our lives. We want to be more faithful followers. And we want to understand how we are a part of this greater thing than just ourselves. If any of that interests you, we've got some classes I think you might like to be a part of or check out. We have on Monday nights a Zoom class called Living the Questions. Wednesday evenings we have meets at an eatery restaurant, a class called The Short Stories of Jesus. Sunday mornings in person we've got a Presbyterian Questions and Answers class and a class called Faith and Theology that looks at our theology or applies our theology to some of the issues going on in our day. All of these are ways that we try to continue to grow in our faith by studying together and asking questions together and wrestling together. If any of that interests you, check out our website, click on the Events tab. It'll tell you everything that's going on. You will also find there an event for our all-committee meeting. Boring name, exciting meeting. This is for anybody, whether you serve on a committee of a church or not. It's a chance to hear what's going on behind the scenes. What are our different committees working on? How are we working together? What are we brainstorming and dreaming about? The last time we did this, we all agreed it was one of the most energizing gatherings we've had as a church in a long time. And so we want to invite you to be a part of that. So if you're interested, again, go to the Events tab on the website. You can click on it there and you can register there so we know whether to have enough lunch for everybody there. And we'd love to see you. That's next Sunday, the 21st, right after worship, after our in-person worship at 11 o'clock down in Fellowship Hall. Well, today we're going to be meeting Hannah. Hannah is the mother of Samuel, one of the most famous of the Old Testament prophets. Samuel we hear a lot about. We usually don't spend a lot of time on his mom. Well, that's what we're going to be doing today because she has quite a story. It's a story of heartbreak, reversals, and hope. And isn't that something we all need? Let's begin with a word of prayer. God, you are the one who hears, and you are the one who answers. Hear us today as we lift up our voices in praise to you. May our praise bring joy to your heart. Hear also our questions and the things we bring that we're struggling with. Speak to us your word of hope. May we grow through listening. Amen. Friends, this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. So today we're going to spend some extended time in 1 Samuel, learning about the prophet Samuel's mother, Hannah. Samuel was one of the most famous prophets in Israel. He led the tribes of Israel before there were kings, and he also anointed the first two kings of Israel. He was remarkable, but so was his mother. Today we're going to hear her story. We start with her prayer to God for a child at the shrine where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. They believed those days that when God was on earth, God literally sat on the Ark of the Covenant. So she brought her prayer straight to God. Let's listen for the Spirit of God for us today in 1 Samuel chapter 1.
On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival used to provoke her severely, to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah said to her, "Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?" After they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose and presented herself before the Lord. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made this vow, "O Lord of hosts, if only you will look on the misery of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a male child, then I will set him before you as a Nazirite until the day of his death. He shall drink neither wine nor intoxicants, and no razor shall touch his head." As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying silently. Only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, "How long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Put away your wine." But Hannah answered, "No, my Lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation all this time." Then Eli answered, "Go in peace. The God of Israel grant the petition you have made to him." And she said, "Let your servant find favor in your sight." Then the woman went to her quarters, ate and drank with her husband, and her countenance was sad no longer. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. Elkanah knew his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. In due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son. She named him Samuel, for she said, "I have asked him of the Lord."
So the story continues with Elkanah going year after year to present the sacrifices at the shrine. When Samuel was about 3 years old, Hannah joins him again, brings Samuel with her to dedicate him to the Lord's service. Samuel is to become a prophet and a mediator of God's word. Bruce Birch, professor of Old Testament, points out that Elkanah makes an interesting statement about Samuel. He says, "May God establish his word," making us aware that we are not just hearing the story of Samuel's beginnings, but the story of God working through Samuel in Israel. So when Hannah finally brings Samuel to Eli at the temple to fulfill her promise to dedicate him to the Lord, she sings a song reminiscent of Mary's song at Jesus' birth, celebrating the great reversal God has done for her and will do for the world. Let's listen to that song now.
Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exults in the Lord. My strength is exalted in my God. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in my victory. There is no holy one like the Lord, no one besides you. There is no rock like God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry are fat with spoil. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low, he also exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might does one prevail. The Lord, his adversaries, shall be shattered. The Most High will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the power of his anointed.
It begins in silence, an anguished silence, as Hannah prays in desperation for a child. Her story is not unique. Countless stories are born in silence. I was 3 years at a church before I realized that the wife of one of the most prominent members of the church was being abused at home. She would show up at church with a smile, laughing. She told no one. Shame, embarrassment, fear, I'm not quite sure which pieces of those all came into play, but she lived her story in silence. A few days ago, we celebrated Veterans Day. And one of the major traumas soldiers endure is moral injury. It's having to do things or live with decisions that violate who they are at the core of their being. Many healthcare workers are discovering the depths of moral injury themselves as a result of COVID, having to tell a wife of 68 years that she can't hold her husband's hand as he takes his last breath. Or living with the fear that by allowing her to take her mask off and kiss him, that we may be signing her death warrant with that action. Many of our healthcare workers have no place to speak of that kind of injury, so they bury it. They don't want to burden their families with it, so they just keep their stories in silence. Then, of course, there are the silent stories in our own communities. We are long past the initial shock of COVID and the impact it's had on our businesses, so much so that we've forgotten those who've lost their businesses during the pandemic, those who've lost their jobs, even those who have lost loved ones. It's been a long time since the total death toll has been a regular feature on the nightly news. It's up to 758,000 deaths, in case you were wondering. That's 758,000 stories of love and loss and dreams that will never be realized. When Hannah shows up at the shrine, she was distressed. She pleaded for a son. She lived in a society where wives were valued when they had children, and she had none. Her barrenness was a mark of shame. A son was a sign of hope, a promise of the future. Other than her husband, the only one she could tell her story to and the only one she could pour her heart out to was God, and hope God would hear, and hope God would answer. It was a silent plea that she made year after year after year. But while her plea may have been silent, her anguish was devastatingly visible, so much so that Eli the priest would see her there praying and think she was drunk because her mouth was moving but nothing was coming out. But she was praying, and her prayer was simple: remember me. The core of her prayer was simply, remember me. Hear me in my silence. See me in my despair. Don't abandon me. Remember me. You see, Hannah knew the stories, how God remembered Sarah and gave her a son in her old age who would be the inheritor of God's promises to them for a future. She remembered how God remembered Rachel, the barren wife of Jacob, and gave her a son who would be the salvation of Israel in a time of famine. And she remembered how God remembered the Israelites when they were in slavery in Egypt and gave them another son, Moses, who would lead them to the promised land. If God could remember them, maybe God could remember her. So often when we are in the depths of fear or depression or anxiety or woundedness, we may not feel, or we may not only feel, that no one else sees the weight we carry. We may feel like God has forgotten us too. We may feel ultimately and completely alone. So Hannah's prayer, in a way, is our prayer. It's remember me. It's the prayer of the mother who lost her job because she couldn't afford daycare. It's the prayer of the wife who lost her husband and couldn't be by his side when he took his final breath. It's the prayer of that business owner whose work of a lifetime, whose dream of a lifetime has closed because economically she couldn't survive the pandemic. It's the prayer of the one who sits alone in an apartment because with social distancing, their support system has been removed. And it is even at times our prayer. For who among us doesn't carry a weight no one else sees, a shame no one else knows, or a loss no one else feels? Year after year, Hannah goes to the shrine and prays. Even though year after year she's not gotten the answer she wanted, a son, she still goes and prays because she remembers. Years ago, I heard someone say, prayer doesn't change God, it changes us. You know, sometimes I think we say that because it makes us feel better when we don't get the answer we want for our prayers. But I think there's a truth in that. I know when I seriously pray for reconciliation with a person, I have no clue what it does to that other person, but I know what it does to me, and it's a good thing. It changes my heart. In that same spirit, I say, prayer doesn't remind God, prayer reminds us, especially when God seems silent. Prayer and telling those stories in prayer remind us that even when God seems silent, God hears, God sees, and God will answer, even if not on our own timetable. It's especially when we draw on those ancient prayers of our faith. You know, reciting those stories of our faith, they remind us that no matter how far away God feels from us, God is nearer than our imaginations. Listen to Psalm 30. This is someone who knew what it was to feel abandoned, someone who truly was alone, who truly was oppressed by his enemies. He knew what it was to feel abandoned, and he speaks of the darkness he endured. God did not protect him from suffering, but God did hear and answer. I will extol you, O God, for you have drawn me up and did not let my foes rejoice over me. Yahweh, my God, I cried to you for help, and you have healed me. You brought up my soul from Sheol. You restored me to life among those who have gone down to the pit. Sing praises to God, O you faithful ones, and give thanks to God's holy name. Weeping may linger for the night, but joy comes in the morning. Even when we feel forgotten by God, God remembers. Sarah prayed, and long past possibility, God gave her a son. Hagar cried out in the wilderness, and when she was on the edge of death, God gave her water. Elijah prayed in a state of utter exhaustion, and God led him to a stream and provided birds to bring food to him. By reciting those stories and promises of God, we remind ourselves that even when things seem darkest, actually not even just when they seem darkest, but when they are dark, even when God seems most absent, God hears, God sees, and God answers. Remember me, Hannah prayed. Remember the God who hears and sees and answers. And God did answer. God gave her her heart's desire. God gave her the son she'd been wanting, a son who would grow up to be a prophet, who would lead God's people, and who would anoint kings. It's tempting to say that when Samuel was born, Hannah had no clue whatsoever who her son would grow up to be. And honestly, I think she probably did have no clue whatsoever, but nonetheless, I think she knew something. Look at the song she sang. Like Mary sang when she was pregnant with Jesus, Hannah sings of the vision of the kingdom of God. She's finally gotten her heart's desire. She's gotten the son who takes away her shame. And she sings about a world where all those who suffer and are powerless, all those who hunger and are broken, are healed and lifted up to places of honor. She sings of the world her son will hold kings accountable to. Her son was more than an answer to her prayer. He was actually an answer to the nation's prayer. You see, Hannah wasn't the only one who was praying for God to remember them. She wasn't the only one who was feeling forgotten by God. She wasn't the only one who was feeling helpless. At this time, the Philistine Empire was expanding into Israelite territory. Israel at that time was just a loose confederation of tribes that pretty much they looked after themselves unless some crisis required a few of them to kind of band together to defeat a threat. There was no centralized government coordinating defense of Israel from its neighbors. Even its religious occultic centers were pretty corrupt. And so even they were not able to draw the tribes together. The book of Judges, which historically precedes this book of Samuel, ends with, in those days, there was no king in Israel, and all the people did what was right in their own eyes. Hannah lived in a time of chaos and danger, and the very future of God's people was at jeopardy. So Hannah was not a singular voice crying out in the darkness. She embodied the prayers of all the people, praying for hope and praying for a future. And God heard, and God answered. And as so often was the case, God's answer was a child who would lead them. Our pleas and our requests may be singular. They may be about the things that are deep in our own hearts, our own pains and our own wounds. But God's answer to those prayers is expansive. God's answer is hope beyond our wildest imagination. Hannah just wanted a son, and God gave her and her people a future. Now, she didn't get to experience it. Even today, we still long for that day when, as the prophet Amos says, justice shall roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. But she was given a vision of where God was leading them. And her son Samuel would be God's agent in his time, guiding them and challenging them and cajoling them towards a vision of peace and justice and wholeness. Be careful what you ask for. God may give you a whole lot more than what you expect. Our own deep needs and wounds may not feel like a national crisis. They may feel very personal, and they are. But they're also universal. We all long for that day when wounds are healed and relationships are restored. That day when justice isn't just a word that we are fighting for, but a way of life. and righteousness, that quality of being our true selves in God's grace. That's just how everybody is. We long for a world at peace where no one need be afraid and where everyone is valued for who they are and given places of honor at the table. We long for a future with hope. And just as God's answer to Hannah was a child who didn't just take away her shame, but who would unite a people and anoint kings, God's answer to us is also a child who is born into the midst of the messiness of life, who walks with us into the pit and into the emergency rooms and into the war zones and into the brokenness in our families and into the shame that we carry, and isn't afraid of it and doesn't abandon us. A child who is a light in the darkness and who gives us a vision and a taste of the future we hope for, where our wounds will be healed and our weights are taken away and joy abounds. May we remember and tell the stories of our faith, for while weeping may linger in the night, joy comes in the morning.
God is my shepherd, I want for nothing. My rest is in the pleasant meadows. He leadeth me where quiet waters flow. My fainting soul doth he restore, and guideth me in the ways of peace to glorify his name. And though in death's dark valley my steps must wander, my spirit shall not fear, for thou art by me still. Thy rod and staff are with me, and they shall comfort me.
Just as Hannah prayed to God in her distress, in her need, and in her hope, so we bring our prayers before God today. As we begin, I invite you to take a moment to just breathe and center your heart and your mind, to set aside those things for a moment that pull you away from being present with God, and let us come before God in prayer. Let us take that moment to breathe. God who remembers and God who hears, we thank you. There are times when we feel like you've forgotten us, like you don't know we're here, or are oblivious to the pains and longings we carry. Truth be told, those are difficult times for us, and at times our faith falters. And yet you do remember, you do hear, and we are not alone. Even when we don't feel your presence, we trust in faith that you are with us, guiding us when the time is right and when we are ready to a new future of hope. It's that timing thing that's difficult for us. We want what we want now. We want the answers we long for, not always the answers you long to give. Thank you for putting up with our impatience and even our lack of faith. When the time is right, your gift does come in small and surprising ways, opening doors to a future full of hope. As Hannah sang, that future that you long to give us is one where the weak are made strong, where the hungry are fed, and where the lowly are raised up. May that future come sooner rather than later, and use us. Empower us to use the gifts you give us to bring us closer to that day. In that spirit, we dare to ask you to remember us and to remember this world. Heal our broken hearts, bind the wounds that weep, lift up those who are struggling, give hope to those who see no hope. We dare to ask because we know you are already at work answering these prayers. May those answers be beyond our wildest hopes for us and for all. This we pray out of love for you and love for this world in which we live, as we boldly pray together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. As we move into our time of giving back to God, so often we are asking for things from God. In worship, we have an opportunity to give back not just the praise and worship of this time, but concrete gifts that we have to help move us closer towards that future of hope that we all long for. As we prepare to do that, I'd like to invite Jana Lohr forward. Jana is chair of our Stewardship and Finance Committee, and she just has some good news to share about how we're doing as a church and what we've been able to do because of you.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jana Lohr, and I currently serve our congregation as chairperson of the Stewardship and Finance Committee, a member of the Shift Task Force, a youth group advisor, and as an elder currently serving on session. I'm here today to say thank you. Thank you for the gifts you have bestowed on First Presbyterian Church, whether those gifts are financial, serving on our many committees or session, or gifts of your talents and time to support our ministries. We thank you. Thank you for your support of our 4 session priorities and connecting with our neighborhood, enhancing a robust online ministry, building a strong and comprehensive pastoral care ministry, and designing and implementing a process that welcomes and integrates people as a member of our church community. Thank you for your commitment to grow where we are planted. Thank you for being a congregation where faith is nurtured, curiosity is encouraged, diversity is welcomed, and all are loved. Thank you so much. The pandemic has brought many challenges and changes to individuals, families, congregations, and communities. What hasn't changed is your love and commitment to our church. Giving has continued to be strong throughout the pandemic, with many members increasing their pledges or fulfilling their pledges on time or even earlier than anticipated. We are truly blessed and humbled by our congregation's generosity. Thank you. In the upcoming weeks, you'll be receiving a communication on how to choose and order your very own First Presbyterian t-shirt as a token of our thanks and appreciation. We hope this will help our church be a visual representation of our congregation out in the community and start the conversation with others about what makes First Presbyterian Church such a special community to be a part of. Our talented leaders and committees have already begun the work of planning for 2022, but we need your help. First, we need your help in completing and returning your 2022 pledge card. Pledge cards help us budget and anticipate contributions for the upcoming year, information all of our committees need to know in order to prepare their yearly budgets. Challenge yourself to possibly increase your giving or invite a friend to attend a new group that you've always wanted to join. What will you commit to in 2022? Lastly, if you'd like to hear exactly what we're planning for next year, the Shift Task Force is excited to facilitate an all-committee meeting after the 10 a.m. service on November 21st. While this may sound like another boring committee meeting, it is anything but. Come listen to our church leaders share their vision for 2022. Come prepared to give input or share excitement if something moves you. Come and be a part of our discussion. All are welcome. Lunch will be provided. Please RSVP on the events tab of our church website or let Carrie in the office know you'd like to attend. I hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jana, for sharing that update with us. Again, I encourage you, as Jana did, that to send in your pledge card. It makes a huge difference in us knowing what we can do next year. If for whatever reason you did not receive one, let us know. We'd be happy to send one out to you. As always, every gift matters, no matter how big or how little. You can text a gift to the church, you can give online, you could mail it in, you could drop it off during the week if you want, whatever works for you. Every dollar you give makes a difference in this church, in our life, in our ministry, and in our community. And so again, thank you. As we go out today, we go out knowing that we go out into a world where people are hurting, where it's not just us, there are others who feel alone and abandoned and in the dark. One of the gifts we have to offer them is the news that they are not alone, that God remembers them, and even if they don't feel it, God is at work, bringing light into their darkness. Let us be a flicker of that light for them. And actually, I don't have to ask, because I know you will be. For you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You are the people of God. And yes, God goes with you. Thanks for joining us at First Presbyterian Church, where faith is nurtured, curiosity encouraged, diversity welcomed, and all are loved. Find out more about us at fpclincoln.org or find us on Facebook.